Returning from the battlefield, Jamal, a black soldier, was astonished to find his wife, Karen, pregnant. Overwhelmed with anxiety and confusion, he waited anxiously for the birth of the child to confirm its paternity. The DNA revealed something unimaginable, changing their lives forever. Jamal's journey from suspicion to a shocking revelation unfolded in ways he could never have anticipated. Jamal had sprinted from a building rigged with explosives, his heart pounding as he distanced himself from the imminent explosion. After 5 intense minutes, the building erupted in flames, hurling him to the ground. He lay there, waiting for the chaos to subside before struggling to his feet and limping away. Jamal, a black soldier serving in the American Army, was stationed in a war-torn Asian country on a peacekeeping mission. It was a harrowing experience where he constantly feared for his life. His only motivation was to survive and return home to his beautiful wife, whom he had married just a year and 4 months ago. When the area was secure, Jamal reunited with his troops. They scoured the area, eventually locating the enemy's hideouts in the mountains. Backup was called, and within minutes, the enemies were neutralized. Weeks passed, and the American soldiers eventually won. Jamal was overjoyed, though the mission was supposed to end months ago. Security threats had extended their stay. Finally, a helicopter from the Air Force Base arrived to take them back home. Jamal didn't even attend the soldiers' party. He quickly boarded a vehicle and headed home. With bated breath, he stepped out of the taxi and walked to his front door. He knocked, and the door slowly opened. His wife, Karen, stepped out, and his loving gaze turned to shock. She was heavily pregnant. Karen was heartbroken when she saw her husband. He had lost so much weight and had bruises still healing on his arms and a few scratches on his face. She screamed and ran into his embrace. Jamal held her tightly, but doubts crept into his mind. How was it possible that his wife was pregnant? Had she cheated on him? After a few minutes of an emotional embrace, Karen let Jamal inside the house. She made him his favorite snack while preparing a meal in the kitchen, giggling as she told him everything that had happened in the neighborhood. Jamal was dumbfounded. All he wanted to talk about was his wife's pregnancy, something she hadn't mentioned in her letters. He had been away for months, so it couldn't possibly be his child, right? But he worried about how to broach the subject without ruining their reunion. Jamal decided to maintain a facade of tranquility and peace. After lunch, Karen took him to their room and showed him the letters she had written to him every month. Letters she wished she could have sent. She had kept them in his wardrobe and had looked forward to reading them to him. Through tears, he read them, each detailing how she missed him. As he watched his wife read the heartfelt letters, different thoughts raced through his mind. Was this all an act? Was he reading the situation wrong? Regardless, he still clung to a thin hope that somehow the child was his. After all, his wife had never given him a reason to question her loyalty. Karen excused herself to use the restroom, leaving Jamal deep in thought, replaying the story of their relationship and marriage in his mind. He met Karen in his 5th year at the academy. Karen, a white lawyer working in the public defender's office, quickly fell for him. After dating for just 3 months, he proposed. 1 month into their honeymoon, he received a call from the military, his presence needed for a peacekeeping mission in Asia, forcing them to cut their honeymoon short. For months into the mission, he returned to America for a brief break, spending only 1 night with Karen before reporting back to camp early the next morning. Could that single night have led to the pregnancy, or was it before the wedding? Lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard a scream. Rushing into the bathroom, he found Karen sprawled on the floor. "The baby's coming," she screamed. Panicking, he grabbed the phone and called for an ambulance. For minutes later, the ambulance arrived, and Karen was rushed to the hospital. She was immediately admitted to the labor ward while he paced in the reception hall. About 30 minutes later, a nurse called him in. Karen had given birth to a baby girl. Jamal walked into the ward, his face beaming with smiles as the nurses handed him the baby. However, his eyes widened in shock as he held the baby in his hands. "A white baby," he said to no one in particular. He immediately shot his wife an accusatory glare. He felt sudden hatred and disgust for her. Given his family's strong genetic predisposition towards darker skin tones, there was no way his child could be white. The only explanation was that Karen must have cheated with a white man. He looked deeply at the baby in his arms, his eyes burning with anger as he realized she had no resemblance to him. He felt no fatherly connection. He lifted his gaze and took deep breaths. It was painful to realize that while he was out there risking his life, his wife had been having an affair. As a soldier, he had learned to control his emotions and didn't want to break down in the hospital. So he immediately faked a smile, kissed the baby's forehead, and thanked Karen for giving birth to a beautiful baby. The next day, Karen was discharged and they went home together. Jamal was lost in a whirlwind of confusion all day. He would stare at the baby, scrutinizing the infant's features, desperate to find a familiar trait. Yet, the more he looked, the more convinced he became that he wasn't the father. This doubt festered, leading to moments where he felt a sharp resentment towards the baby. A week later, Jamal visited his friend, a genetic engineer, and shared his fears. His friend explained that Jamal's child should most likely inherit his genetic traits. This only shattered Jamal further. He realized he was a victim of paternity fraud and felt a strong urge to remove his wife and the baby from his life. However, his friend opposed this drastic step, advising him to take a DNA test as a final measure to confirm the truth beyond any doubt. Jamal returned home with a furious glare. Karen had never seen that look on his face and immediately panicked. It also dawned on her that he hadn't smiled since they left the hospital. As he approached them, he suddenly screamed, "You cheat!" Karen froze in shock, completely unprepared for such a painful accusation. She tried to grasp why he was so angry, but Jamal was panting heavily, and she instinctively stepped back from him. "No matter what happens, we can talk about it without disturbing our baby," she pleaded. "Our baby? She's not my daughter," he barked. Those words hung in the air, leaving Karen stunned and confused. It didn't make sense to her, and she needed to be sure she had heard him correctly. "She's not my daughter," he reiterated. Karen shivered at the weight of the accusations, unable to believe they came from her husband. She swore that he was her first and that she had never cheated on him. Despite her pleas, Jamal was too hurt to listen. He demanded a DNA test to either vindicate her or confirm his suspicions. Karen spent the entire day and night crying, feeling like this was some cruel nightmare. She was hurt that he didn't trust her, but was determined to prove her fidelity. The next day, they went to the hospital for a DNA test. The lab technician collected their samples and started the process. The day Jamal spent waiting for the results felt like the longest of his life. During this time, he didn't help Karen with chores or the baby. He just sat in the living room, tapping his legs rhythmically and staring blankly at the TV. After a long week, the test results were ready, and the lab assistant handed them to him. Afterward, they drove home without saying a word to each other. When they got home, Jamal slowly opened the sealed envelope with bated breath and trembling fingers. He unfolded the paper, and his eyes widened in shock. Just as he had feared, the result was negative. He wasn't the father of the baby. Jamal's screams echoed through the house, causing Karen and the baby to cringe in fear. Karen desperately begged, insisting she would never cheat on him. She explained that during the months he spent in the battle-torn country, she had simply focused on her job. Despite her pleas, Jamal's mind was made up. He ordered her to pack her things and leave his house. Karen pleaded for a maternity test, sensing something was off but unable to pinpoint what. Jamal wouldn't listen. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Karen collapsed to the floor, crying until her eyes were sore. Jamal didn't come home that night and only returned the following day. As soon as she saw him in the living room, Karen dropped to her knees and swore she had never cheated on him. She suggested a maternity test again, but he wouldn't listen. He didn't want to raise his hopes only for them to be squashed again. Resigned, Karen dressed her baby up, and together they went to her family's house in a suburban part of town. There, she cried on her mother's lap and begged her to speak with her husband. Her mother comforted her and promised to visit him the next day. Karen's mother advised her to reach out to Jamal's parents. Jamal only had his father left, so Karen decided to visit the old man over the weekend. He lived in a neighboring town. In the meantime, Karen tried several times to call her husband, but he refused to answer the calls. Karen was devastated to see the only man she had ever loved slipping away from her. Over the weekend, Karen explained to Jamal's father everything that had happened, and he sympathized with her. Her only request was that Jamal agree to a maternity test. His father promised to talk to him about it, and Karen left feeling somewhat hopeful. For the entire following week, she heard nothing from Jamal. Despite the silence, she held on to the belief that he would eventually come to his senses. 2 weeks later, Jamal returned home. Karen pleaded with him once more, desperate for him to agree to the maternity test to clear her name. She simply needed him to go there with her so he could watch everything with his eyes. But Jamal told her he didn't care about a maternity test and that the results, whatever they turned out to be, wouldn't change a thing. The girl wasn't his, and that meant the end of their marriage. Furiously, he demanded that she leave the house. Thinking he was only threatening, Karen continued to beg, but he was resolute. He stormed into their bedroom and threw her suitcase into the living room. Karen quickly grabbed her baby from the crib to protect her from the flying luggage. It suddenly dawned on her that this was the end of their love story. She had never envisioned her marriage ending like this. After all the sacrifices she had made for Jamal during his time at the military academy, she had loaned him significant amounts of money to cover his bills. She even funded their wedding before he received his first military paycheck. She paid for their rent, food, and all other expenses. She even covered the cost of their vacation. Karen truly loved him and would never consider cheating on him for any reason. "Jamal, you can't throw us out into the street. Even if you hate me so much now, I want you to know that I have as much right to this house as you do," she cried, her anger rising. Jamal gave her an ultimatum of just an hour to leave their house entirely before storming out. Karen realized she needed to leave right away. Jamal was no longer the man she loved, and this new person could harm her and the baby. Fearing the worst, she quickly booked a taxi, packed her bags, and got ready to move to her parents' place. Her baby looked at her sadly, sensing her mother's distress. When the cab arrived, she climbed in and said goodbye to her house filled with memories. Then she turned to face the future, ready to start a new life with her daughter. 2 weeks later, Jamal returned home, packed his belongings, and moved out as well. He couldn't continue living there as every single thing reminded him of Karen. As soon as he moved out, he asked for a divorce. Doing her best to move on, Karen immediately granted it. It didn't take long for Jamal to think of pursuing a relationship with a high-class woman so he could get over Karen and the horrifying memories he left behind. One fateful night at the club, he met a stunning woman, Samantha, who worked as a model. They struck up a conversation that flowed effortlessly. They discovered shared interests and a deep connection. Before long, they found themselves lost in each other's eyes. Their whirlwind romance blossomed with dates that felt like dreams and laughter that filled the air. Just 2 months later, he knew he couldn't imagine a life without her by his side. He proposed, and she said yes. They tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by friends and family. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, he knew he had found his soulmate in this beautiful woman. If only he knew what horrors lay ahead. Samantha was a fashionista, always clad in the latest and most expensive clothes. Jamal didn't mind the extravagance because he loved her deeply. As time passed, he became completely absorbed in his new life, forgetting all about his previous wife and child. After a year of marriage, Jamal desired to have children with his new wife, but she wasn't ready to embrace motherhood. As a model, she prioritized maintaining her physique for her career. Despite his wishes, Jamal complied with her decision. Meanwhile, his military career flourished, leading to promotions. His wife continued to indulge in lavish clothing, shoes, and wigs, and they enjoyed vacations in various countries together. After 15 childless years, Jamal's wife still wasn't prepared for parenthood. Meanwhile, as 2 countries engaged in war, Jamal joined the troops sent for peacekeeping duties. While stationed there, their camp became a target for grenades. Without warning, an explosion rocked the camp, leaving Jamal severely injured and falling into a coma. At the hospital, examinations showed that Jamal's spinal cord had been irreversibly damaged in the accident, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. When he regained consciousness, the news brought tears to his eyes. His heart felt so heavy, and he wasn't sure he would ever recover from this setback. He underwent extensive medical treatment and rehabilitation to adapt to his new physical circumstances. The military also provided him with financial support and resources to help him transition to civilian life. Jamal got all the support he needed, except the one he needed the most, the love and support of his wife. She hated his new condition, and the sight of him simply disgusted her. One day, she decided she was done. She took a large portion of his settlement fee and disappeared. Jamal felt deeply betrayed that his wife of 15 years would abandon him in such a deplorable condition. Sitting in his wheelchair, he felt miserable and empty, with no one to help him around the house. Tears streamed down his face as he remembered the one person who had loved him unconditionally. Reflecting on the past, he recalled how Karen had stood by him and the sacrifices she made while he was at the academy. He regretted his actions and wished he had listened to her. Now, 15 years had passed without any contact, and he felt it was too late to go back. During the first 2 years of their separation, she had tried calling and texting him, but he never answered. Now, he yearned for her more than ever. Adjusting to life with his disability was proving incredibly difficult. He knew he needed help, so he hired a caretaker. However, a caretaker couldn't fill the void in his heart. Many nights, he cried himself to sleep, consumed by loneliness. His sanity was slipping as he struggled to accept his new reality. The pain of his past mistakes was an agonizing reality he couldn't escape. After 6 months, the pain became unbearable, so he hired a private investigator to find his ex-wife, Karen. He wanted to apologize to her and the child she had. He was willing to do anything to have them back in his life, whether the girl was his biological daughter or not. He imagined his daughter pushing his wheelchair during morning walks while Karen prepared breakfast at home. The thought made him smile, and he sincerely hoped the investigation would succeed. 2 weeks later, he received the investigation report. Karen was living in a duplex in the neighboring city and appeared to have found wealth. However, there was no information about the girl. The investigator couldn't find any trace of the girl that fit the description Jamal was looking for. This news plunged him into deep thought. Maybe she was dead. Maybe something bad had happened to her. Maybe Karen put her up for adoption. Whatever the case might be, he would figure it out himself. Jamal also learned that Karen hadn't remarried, and that gave him hope that they might be able to work things out. For weeks later, Jamal traveled to her city and appeared at her doorstep. When Karen and a girl of roughly 15 years emerged from the house, Jamal was shocked to see a black girl standing next to Karen. How had the white baby changed to black? Looking closer, he saw the striking resemblance between him and the girl. He felt a strong fatherly connection to her. This was his blood, his daughter. He let go of his wheelchair and dropped to the ground, desperately begging for forgiveness. It was a sorry sight, but Karen wasn't moved. She felt no pity at all. She knew a day like this would come, and she was prepared. She wanted nothing to do with her ex-husband. Despite his pleas, she refused to budge. The only thing she was willing to offer him were the answers he sought. You see, as soon as Karen left Jamal, she did a maternity test. The result was shocking. The white baby wasn't hers. She immediately called the hospital where she had given birth. Realizing their mistake, the hospital took swift action. They checked their birth records and certificates and discovered that a careless nurse had accidentally switched the babies. The hospital, fearing severe legal trouble, contacted the other parents and explained everything. Karen traveled back to reclaim her child, resulting in an emotional exchange since each parent had bonded with their baby. The hospital compensated them for the damages, and Karen was happy to have her biological child back. Her daughter was black and resembled her ex-husband. Karen had tried to inform him, but he never answered her texts or calls. After a year of trying to reach him, she gave up. She named her daughter Sharon and took it upon herself to raise her. She began sharing lifestyle content on social media and quickly gained a large following. Within months, this led her to become a successful lifestyle coach, earning money from her endeavors. By the time Sharon turned 14, she had developed a passion for modeling. Her mother opened a YouTube page for her, and within a year, Sharon also amassed a significant number of followers. Jamal realized he had lost everything, so he begged relentlessly. He attempted to hug his daughter, but the security guard yelled at him and stopped him. Despite his desperate pleas, Karen remained unmoved. It dawned on him that he had lost his family for good. With great effort, he crawled back into his wheelchair. Karen and Sharon ignored him and went back into the house. Defeated, the black soldier had no choice but to wheel himself away.